Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Fundamental Escape podcast. Here today with Shane Hips, a returning guest from from a previous episode. So welcome back to the podcast, Shane.
I'm glad to be here, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, what is going on in your country right now? Let's start
Not
there.
much, not much. Nothing new. Nothing to report.
Nothing new under the sun. Yeah, so
No.
it's been fascinating as an outsider to watch I've never followed politics. I've never really been interested, but certain candidates have made it very very watchable from an outside perspective. It's been intense. So what are your
Certainly.
what were your general thoughts? Are you like where do you stand with things like politics? We didn't talk about that at all last time. So
Yeah, sure. Well, I find I probably have a perspective on politics that is probably informed by a pretty anti-establishment sensibility. So I have a deep awareness that we are somehow being manipulated at all times.
yeah,
That is also part of my McLuhan influence. And so when I look at and observe political process, political discourse, and the narratives that the sort of corporate media decide we're going to care about, I'm always suspicious. I'm always interested to know what's the story behind the story that we're not allowed to see or have access to. So, in my opinion, I believe that the Republican and Democratic Party in this country have largely been controlled by the same basic interests. I don't mean like Dr. Evil, one guy behind the scenes conspiracy theory. I mean like verifiable facts that banking interests, global banking interests, corporate interests have controlled and rightly, smartly bought both parties.
wow,
And so when they sort of set up what appears to be a right and a left, it's really the right and the left hand of the same entity.
mm,
And effectively what they try to do is ferment deep, painful issues of divide and discord so that you pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, which is the man behind the curtain, or in this case, the collection of entities that have I'm not saying they all have one shared interest. I think they have their own competing interests, but they effectively have the same basic interest, which is the accumulation of as much power as possible.
yeah,
And this, subjugation may be too strong of a word, but it is a version of this. The sort of the more they can sow ignorance among us, the better off they are. And those powers and interests are, if they're smart, they're completely hidden behind many, many layers of institutional protection. And so there's not an individual I can point to and say this. I can say that these players are, they're not perfect puppets, but they are players in a system that they sometimes don't even know that they're being pulled on. I would say that the two exceptions to that would have been Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders, who were deeply disruptive forces to the establishment.
yeah.
And so I'll pause there for now. You asked me the question.
No,
What was
there's
my
so
perspective?
much. Oh my
Sure.
gosh, there's so much I could unpack with what you've just said. That's incredible. I did watch a clip online recently. The philosopher Slavoj Žižek, I think that's how you say his name.
Yep.
He was talking.
Zizek.
Yeah. So he was talking about Donald Trump as a character, and him being elected, and essentially he was making the point that he was talking about this idea of disruption, and he wasn't in any way, shape, or form advocating for him, but he was kind of in a sense saying, I think this is what we need. Like, we need to be shaken up. We need a disruption, from the status quo, and we need, because it raises questions and it raises challenges that we need to face. And I think that's what I kind of gathered from what he was saying. It's just been fascinating. I wonder, because you mentioned McLuhan already. I've got flickering pixels here in front of me, and I was like kind of keen to sketch out some of that stuff. You talk about his book, like Understanding Media and things, and one of the terms that's come out through this cycle was this whole fake news kind of thing. But I'm sure you'd have some different insights on this, like in regards to obviously technology. Most of us are reading our news on screens, for example. So, what's the impact? Is there any profound impact to that side of things when we're sort of absorbing, media through that technology?
Well, yeah, I think there's a couple of really fascinating things that have less to do with McLuhan insight. They are related to media and technology, but they're more related to the levers behind the technology. So it is assumed that Google is this independent research engine that if I type in something, it will simply go out and find all the things that are available. When in reality, there is actual documented evidence that the CIA and Department of Defense provided seed funding for Google. They provided seed funding for Facebook. They provided seed funding for Microsoft. So there are entrenched interests that have been actively trying to build weapons, digital weapons, for the next wave of war. And they've been at it for quite some time with Intel, Cisco, Google, all of these different things. So when we say, there's fake news and there's real news, what's funny there is you have a collection of people that are trying to advocate for various narratives. And the levers of control are behind the scenes, things that you can't see. The fact that all 1,200 basic media stations are owned by 5 corporations. Viacom, Disney, Time Warner, Clear Channel, and News Corp. So these are the 5 corporations, 5 CEOs, that literally decide all of the media and what's valid and what's invalid. And that is the sort of sanctioned propaganda. Now, it's not necessarily government-sanctioned propaganda, it's corporate-sanctioned propaganda. So this is not a statement about the liberal bias of the media. The media is biased liberal to the extent that they believe that will help them bring about their corporate agenda.
Yeah, okay.
But their primary agenda is a corporate agenda. And so when they decide, I get these hilarious emails from the New York Times that are trying to tell me that I should sign up for the New York Times. And they're all about, do you care about truth? Do you care about the facts? We care about the truth. We care about the facts. And I'm going, it's really interesting because for quite some time, you guys had a whole lot of articles that built up to the war in Iraq that was technically fake news. So Donald Trump has rightly called out the news media. Now, he does it in the most hilarious way you can imagine. Like his first press conference, he was like, BuzzFeed, no, you're a failing pile of garbage.
Oh, my gosh, yeah. CNN, no, you are fake news. Yeah.
Fake news. And in fairness to Donald Trump, in both those instances, he was rightly calling out serious errors in journalistic integrity that they had not vetted and then were later called out on it. But what's funny is they're not ever held accountable. There's no one that can hold the media accountable. So in our country, we have what's called a quote-unquote free press.
Yeah.
This press has not been free in 2 decades. It is owned by corporate interests who are also the same interests who own our government. So what Trump has the capacity to do, and I don't know that he'll do it. I believe Trump is a genuine wild card, and I have no idea what he's going to do. I really don't. But I do believe that as of right now, he is not currently bought out by those interests, though he might be in time. I don't think it'd be that hard to buy someone out. But in theory, he would be one of the few candidates on the planet that wouldn't need to be bought out. If he's a billionaire, he doesn't have to go get more money. So in theory, he could remain somewhat independent of these interests, and that will, by its very nature, be incredibly destabilizing. Yeah. And depending on which side of the fence you're on, that's either the best news you've ever heard or it's a total catastrophe. And in my mind, it's going to be both.
Yeah.
There are going to be some really disruptive things, and there's going to be some really potentially positive things. I believe Donald Trump will accidentally or on purpose, I don't know which, I don't know. Some people think he's playing 4-dimensional chess. Other people think he's not that bright. I have no idea what he is. I've not met him personally. All I can say is, one way or another, he will undoubtedly expose certain things that were inappropriate.
Yeah.
And I believe it will be really valuable. So I'm not sure if that answered your
No,
question,
no,
but
no.
as it relates to fake news, the other thing I'll just say, one last thing is Facebook. Facebook has decided that it will curate the news for us, which I find quite fascinating. I think it's fascinating any time somebody has a social media platform that decides what information I'm allowed to see and what I'm not. What it shows us is that Facebook is just another mechanism of control.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about, I've got a friend of mine he's pretty pro Trump, I guess you could say lightly, but he's studied like media and that a little bit, and he seems to take the view that you hypothesize that there is a real intelligence behind Trump, and he seems to be playing this game with the media that he knows, you know, knows what's going on and things like that. And for example, with the statement made about the crowd size at the inauguration being verifiably like false essentially, but then it sort of opened up this dialogue between the media. They were called out as well on someone had run a story about the bust of MLK being removed or whatever it was, and Sean Spicer seems to be getting up at these press conferences saying, "Hey, this integrity thing goes both ways." And like you, I think, quite rightly pointed out that the media, it's like I say, it's interesting to watch from an outside perspective because they've never been called out like this, as far as I can see, and I don't think they much like it.
No, and they have a lot of other tricks up their sleeve that they'll keep trying to use. But, I lived through a version of this when I was in Minnesota, and we elected Jesse Ventura as our governor.
I love watching that guy.
Yeah, and Jesse Ventura was very similar to Trump. He still is very similar to Trump in that he had an incredibly antagonistic relationship to the media, and he did lots of very disruptive things.
Yeah.
And by the end, the media effectively won. I'm not sure that's going to hold true here because at that time the media still was believed to be independent and objective, whereas I think this last election demonstrated the media clearly has exposed biases.
Yeah. No, it's been interesting. Since we last spoke, I have taken this turn in like the conversation. Like I say, I've started being, intrigued with watching all this stuff, and it's interesting because I sort of like when we talk about things like the left versus the right, and I guess this is something I'd be keen to dive into because it gets pretty divisive, and you realize pretty quickly why people say like don't discuss religion and politics because it gets so crazy, right? It just but especially with this thing online with technology, like we live in a world now where we can put ourselves in these echo chambers like on purpose, and I've heard people say things like the algorithms of Facebook and Twitter, like they're tailored to feed you what you want to hear, sort of a thing. So I'm curious to
a combination of that and what they want you to
hear. Yeah. So
they give you just what you want to hear, so that you'll credibly take in what they want you to hear.
Yeah,
and they do have an agenda.
So it's like a Trojan horse, essentially.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So see, this is opening up so much.
Google has tailored it as well.
Yeah.
So that there's not only that, there's then SEO. There's all kinds of things that are going on here that people can't see. There's a great documentary that shows you just how far effectively cyber warfare can go, and that's the documentary 0 Days. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it.
Oh, wow. Oh, cool.
It's the true story of the Stuxnet virus and what happened and how it emerged. The Stuxnet virus was this virus that effectively infiltrated Iranian centrifuges and blew them up. And no one knew where it came from, but eventually it came out that it was a combination of the CIA, NSA, and Mossad, Israeli intelligence services. And they went a little too far with it, and they outed themselves effectively. But there is a massive amount of control. So if you think about the Intel processor and Cisco routers, which the CIA was involved in seed funding these companies, what that meant is that they have access to all of your hardware, which is why when you see the Snowden documentary or the movie Snowden, you see that they have the ability to turn on and off the camera on your computer, even if the computer is off. The only way to do that is if you have access to the hardware itself before it goes in the computer. And that's part of what's going on in the world. Now, it looks like a highly democratizing medium, and elements of it certainly are. But there's a whole lot more going on beneath the surface that we can't see.
That's not terrifying at all. I want to pick up...
documents, I mean, if I were talking like this 4 years ago, people would roll their eyes and say I'm crazy. But with Snowden's documents, people are like, that's believable, actually.
Yeah. I wanted to pick up, I thought it was interesting what you said earlier about the sort of the left and the right, how, they're both, I can't remember the wording you exactly, like factions of each other, like they need each other almost. Like, I mean...
They're an illusion. The right and the left are an illusion.
Yeah, I would be keen to break that down.
The right and the left, they're no more divided than my own hands are divided.
So how do we? Okay, so where do we go with that information? Because I'm like, that's fascinating to hear you say that. Like, because I've been in this real echo chamber where all this language has been employed to like slur the left or slur the right, and people come up with these buzzwords, and it's interesting. I use I like the example. Like I've said, often I've got friends who are atheists, for example, and I sort of joked with one of my friends a while ago, saying, if atheists, for example, if they woke up in a world tomorrow without any religion, like they wouldn't know what to do with themselves because they're so predicated on like debunking the other. It's almost like it is this symbiotic relationship where you like, and I guess that ties into the concept of scapegoating a little bit as well, where you like, this evil is located outside of myself, and I need to personify them as the bad people, and then I can sort of, justify my own behavior, sort of a thing. So
go ahead.
No, I'm just asking the question, I suppose, trying to frame it as a question, like, coming to more of what does it mean to realize what you're saying, like, practically, like, when you come to that realization that you've just kind of raised?
Well, I think the first thing to think about is to step back and say, if I wanted to go ahead and subjugate a group of people, first thing I would do is I wouldn't want them to know I exist, because I become a lot more powerful when I'm hidden. Second thing I want to do is make sure that they fight each other so they never pay any attention to me. And whatever I can do to fight each other, I'm going to choose issues and stir them up in a way that are very, very visceral. So I'm going to choose things like sex. I'm going to choose things like killing babies. I'm going to choose things, those are the things that I'm going to talk about. Those are the things that I'm going to use to throw grenades in between groups of people. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up the illusion that there are really only two possible answers to any one problem. This is the most hilarious thing I've ever seen, that we actually believe there really is only a right and a left.
Yeah.
There are only two answers, and it's on this issue, and you have to pick a side. And I'm not suggesting that the issues don't matter, and I'm not suggesting that you can't or shouldn't have a perspective, an opinion, or a side. I'm merely suggesting that if you cannot see that it is one part of the mechanism to bring about influencing behavior, focusing attention, and distraction, then you will spend a lot of time and energy winding yourself up over something that ultimately is designed to ensnare you.
Yeah.
And so that's the first thing I would say about the right and left. Second thing I would say is pay attention to money. This is where all of the power lies. And global banking interests are actively working to bring about more and more accumulation of money for themselves and less accumulation for the masses. And that's built into the system. So that's all that, in my mind, political discourse is, until Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump came along, and they were disruptive forces. They were simply not buying into those realities. Now, candidly, full disclosure, I was a huge fan of Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I'm not sure Bernie Sanders could have gone up against powers this big. And in a weird way, Trump's massive ego and enormous fortune, though most people would paint as dark, may be the very weapons that inoculate him from the kind of damage that could be done to him.
Yeah.
And it sounds strange, but it's one of these things where I think we're in a transitional stage where in the next 10 or 20 years we're going to start seeing a lot more politicians with a lot more integrity. But we're in a transitional phase where Trump is what you have, and I think he's there to effectively destroy the system. And I think when it does, it'll get rebuilt on different terms.
Yeah, yeah. That's fascinating. That's totally fascinating. I guess, like one of the things I actually written down here was this concept of the third way, which is, you talked about like, this false notion that there's only two different possibilities or two different correct answers, sort of a thing. Like, I'm finding in my own like processing of all this stuff in my own journey with it all, I feel like it is kind of pushing me back to the whole Jesus narrative in a funny way. Like I'm just like, you talk about like forgiving your enemies and turn the other cheek and all that kind of stuff, right? Like, there has to be for there to be because it seems like you get this kind of divide where it's like one side has this prescribed like if we just have this and this then we better. One way I've heard it said is like the conservative like right seem to be looking to the answers backward, like in hindsight, right? Like you look at Donald Trump's whole like slogan, "Make America Great Again." Like we had this utopia back here, whereas the liberals seem to be like this progressive, like no, it's in front of us, we're moving towards it, and now you've impeded that. Sort of thing, and I wonder, like from that Christian sort of perspective, it's been challenging my thinking, where it's just like maybe we shouldn't pin all our hopes on this external thing we call the government to like, institute love, essentially.
Absolutely. This is the other reason why, at the end of the day, for me, this is theater.
Yeah.
Yes, there's real things that are being impacted. Yes, I know that people are going to suffer as a consequence of whoever was in office. Could have been Clinton, could have been Trump. Someone was going to feel it. And people are feeling it now with this immigration ban. So I'm not suggesting that it's not relevant at all. I'm simply saying, at the end of the day, the message of Jesus, one, he was anti-establishment, but two, he pointed people to the interior.
Yeah.
He said the kingdom of heaven is within you. So if you're looking for salvation, you won't find it out here, not in these political parties. And so for me, it's entertainment. It's not actually something that has control over my well-being.
Yeah.
And I think that's the kind of the message that I would love to get out is no one else outside yourself has control over your well-being. And the notion that they do is part of the disempowered narrative that makes you feel desperate and makes you feel you have to clamor to attach to a political party to make yourself feel safe again. And it's part of the illusion. I'm not saying you can't or you shouldn't. I'm just saying understand what its function is. And it is not the source of your well-being. It's not the source of my well-being. Nor is it the cause of my disharmony. Only if I let it be.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you said that. It is interesting because one of the terms that's come up in a lot of this more in culture discourse than necessarily just politics, but there's this term, I'm not sure if you're familiar, this term like social justice warriors, and it's this kind of like term that's been coined to describe these people that do seem to do what you've kind of fall into this trap that you've kind of painted, where they don't see themselves as the arbiter of their own destiny, I suppose you could say it like that, where they are pinning. It's been sort of explained, as I understand, as this kind of like victim hierarchy where it's like, oh, you're oppressed, and this is where you fit on the scale of things of oppression, and you need to like, it's almost, it does become this economic language where it's like you're leveraging your victim status to like get power, and you feel disenchanted and disenfranchised and disempowered ultimately. And I love what you've just said, this whole idea of like, no, we do need to take control and responsibility, and I think that is, I completely concur with you that's an important message to get out, because I look at my own life and like anyone else's, like I'm sure any one of us can come up with any number of reasons to go, oh, I'm a victim, I'm oppressed, like I'm helpless, and it is this disempowering thing at the end of the day where I'm just like, no, like we need to change. So how do we do that? I guess it becomes the question, like how do we take steps or become more aware of that reality that we can, change our own like trajectory, sort of a thing.
I mean, I think one of the first steps is to become very mindful of what it is we're watching. So, what media do we consume? What are we consuming on Facebook? What are those things that we take in? Because that will begin to frame your narrative about what is. And whether you're reading alt-right, alt-left, mainstream, doesn't really matter. All of those things will begin to shape how you view the world and how you view yourself in that world.
Yeah.
And so I'm not suggesting you can't or shouldn't read or think or see any of these things. I'm simply saying, can you notice the way in which your mood shifts? Pay very careful attention to your emotional state when you're watching or reading whatever it is you're watching or reading. If your emotional state shifts to one of anxiety, fear, longing, envy, depression, this is a big indicator that you are not in alignment with your highest expression, with God.
Yeah.
This is a big indicator. And so if people pay attention to that great thermometer, that governor that will tell you, is your tank getting emptier or is it getting fuller? That should be an excellent guide for you about where you should focus your attention.
Yeah.
Because if you are becoming more and more anxious, more and more enraged, more and more disempowered, then you are falling right into the very thing they hope to create.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Fear is one of the things that they want to create. Fear is a very, very powerful motivator.
Yeah.
And it motivates you to entrench, to circle the wagons, to hate, and to lock up. Fear is a very, very low, restrictive kind of energy. And what it does is it prevents you from growing.
Yeah. Well, I guess that ties in, you do talk about that a little bit at the beginning of Flickering Pixels. You're like, with your background in marketing, for example, like, and I've done sales as well and things, so I do understand some of the principles where it's that whole fear of loss. Like, if you don't have this, then you're going to miss out, and you need this because this is going to complete your life and make you, this better person and things like that. So that seems to tie into it as well. But I guess, yeah, this whole idea of purpose, like I know, your latest book, Cats Don't Bark, was, to do with like finding your purpose and things like that. And I think we may have covered it a little bit last time we spoke, but this whole idea, I was actually watching a clip from a couple of years ago where you were talking about the whole concept of how, like, say, the difference between human beings and, animals, and how, like, when a bee is born, it doesn't, it just runs on instinct, right? It doesn't need to be told, hey, this is your life's purpose. And it seems like that's a message to kind of maybe even rehash a little bit in today's climate, like where, you do seem like it seems like there are masses and masses of people, both on the left and the right, I guess you could say, that are kind of aimless and they don't have purpose, and they're being sort of hijacked into this, like, hey, this is the way to go forward, and they're being sold this narrative essentially, like, so, yeah, how can we like unpack that a little bit? How do we sort of go in that direction where we find out, like finding our purpose and actually feeling, like we're contributing like to this world rather than just kind of going along with the status quo sort of a thing.
Yeah, it links to what I was just saying, which was you have a powerful and absolutely reliable guidance system that is built into your being. All of us have this. And it is your emotional state. Your emotional life functions exactly like the physical senses in your body do. When I touch a hot stove, my nerve endings shout at me and give me pain. That isn't punishment. That's guidance.
Yeah.
It's, hey, maybe you don't want to do that next time. And then I can learn from it, or I can reject it and say, no. The way to heaven is through suffering. So I'm just going to put my hand right here. And I'm just going to keep feeling that burn and keep feeling that burn, because that's got to be the right way. Very few of us do that in our physical life. But when it comes to our emotional life, we seem to think that suffering is what saints are supposed to do.
Yeah.
This is not how God set this up. There is built into you joy. It is not your joy. It is God's joy. And so when you pursue something that brings you joy, you are pursuing God's purpose. It was given to you by God.
Yeah.
There's a reason that certain things give you joy that don't give me joy. Because God tailor-made you to want certain things. And so paying very close attention to your desire, what it is you want, and what gives you life, what gives you joy, these are the things that are little breadcrumbs that guide you perfectly on the path.
Yeah.
And when you follow this state, this excitement, this passion, this interest, you should have no expectation of the outcomes. Because where you're being guided is bigger than you can imagine.
Yeah.
And the fewer expectations we have, the less resistance we have about our being guided there. And so when we start to align ourselves with our own heart, with the unique, distinct beat of our own heart, we actually have a chance at starting to experience life as water flowing rather than climbing up a mountain. It is no longer efforting or striving, trying to figure out. It is now allowing and easing and flow. And it becomes quite effortless. It becomes quite joyful. It becomes quite playful. It becomes quite spontaneous. It becomes full of all kinds of surprises that both delight, inspire, frighten, challenge, open, close. And so this is the dance that we're being asked to do in life.
It is almost like this, I would almost frame it like it is this unfolding narrative, right? That this drama that we're living out. And, we talked last time, I shared some of my frustrations about, the journey that I've been on, where I've tried to it's almost like having this false sense of this ideal of a utopia where it's like, oh, if I just got to this level, then I'd have all the answers. And, and you talked about it like a puzzle, right, where you're sort of putting all the pieces together, and it's like appreciating all of it, where it all belongs together, and you need, it's like I look back and I go, well, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for this, and instead of kind of like this deep regret that many of us can live with, like, oh, I wish I had never done this or this or this, instead of like giving ourselves a bit of grace and saying it's okay, for example, you talked about just now, the whole concept of the fact that what drives me or brings me joy might be completely different, would most likely be completely different to you or anyone else. And I think that's a beautiful thing. I've found even, because I took a bit of a break from doing this podcast, and I'm just starting to get back into it now. And I'm just I'm feeling real kind of comfortable in my own skin, essentially. I'm just I like this. This is me. And this is, for whatever reason, I'm wired to enjoy these kind of conversations and discourse where I'm just I love being challenged with new ideas and things like that. And it's I realize it's not for everyone, but it's great to come to that place where you're just it is this peace, I would say, where you're just when you stop striving, right? When you stop, you can just, and then there seems to be when you look around, that's what is clear to me, where there is this kind of tension. And I've noticed that even I follow certain people on Twitter, and even in some progressive kind of Christian circles, I've noticed there seems to be this kind of hijacking where people are kind of buying into the fear and freaking out right now, especially in America, where resistance and all this kind of stuff. And I'm just that's not compelling to me. I'd rather have these ongoing conversations where we kind of figure the things out. Say, for example, it's a touchy subject obviously at the moment with the immigration ban that's going on, and I talked about this yesterday with a comedian out in LA, and this whole idea of what's going on. And I spent a good couple of days like wrestling through it within myself, going, what do I think about this? I was like, I don't like. I feel like it's not a good thing because I think it could cause more division. And then I'm just like, but then how do you keep people safe and all this kind of stuff? And so how do we? Not how do. I'm not asking like for a definitive answer, obviously, but like I think it's important to make these steps to kind of to pursue that peaceful, coming from that peaceful, rational place rather than this reactionary. And I think that ties into social media a little bit as well. When we're all connected so instantaneously, it's like we tend to react rather than just like, whoa, what's going on here? Like, let's kind of talk this out. And there doesn't seem to be much.
As it relates to the ban, my wife is Iranian and half her family lives in Iran. And the ban, we had aunts and uncles coming to visit, and we had a wedding here in this country that family members were going to come, and they were already visas ready to go. We went through a big process to get them here, and as of 2 days ago, they're no longer going to be able to come.
Whoa.
So I have direct personal experience with the ban having an impact. Now, having said that, again, this is part of the wild card of Trump. This is not an anti-Muslim ban. This is a ban against certain countries that they've identified or believe are dangerous. So there are plenty of Muslims that are still allowed to come to this country. They just happen to be from these countries they're not. And the other thing I would say is this is a temporary ban, and Trump probably has no idea that he's also breaking the law in doing it. so he doesn't have this sort of maniacal attempt to try to harm. He is like a businessman lurching rapidly and not paying any attention to the unintended consequences of managing a system that is so much more vast than a business and has so many more moving parts and has so many more legal restrictions that he really doesn't understand it.
Yeah.
And he's not that interested in understanding it. And so I'll be very interested to see how Trump evolves as he encounters more and more resistance to his unilateral choices.
Yeah.
But in response to that, our response is not to get up in arms. It's not to protest. I'm not a problem with people that do. It's just to recognize, take a deep breath, and understand that this is all part of a major transformation that is taking place. And there are going to be times when it feels really bad and times when it'll feel better. But for now, it is premature to judge any of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I think, like, say, like, the whole Hollywood establishment, for example, seems to be, like, you've got, say, the speech that Meryl Streep made at the Golden Globes and things like that. It seems like there is, like we talked about, this disruption of power, and certain people don't seem to like it very much at all. Like, but I don't, that side of it, I don't think is a bad thing, because I don't, like, I think being, if you were in this constant place of power and, eliteness or whatever you want to call it, like, I don't think that would do much for your character. I think it's good to go through these disruptions and to be challenged, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so where where do we go from here? Where does the world go from here is the question. What's going to happen next? I mean, it feels like with all the executive orders that Trump made within like the first week, it felt like a year, quite honestly. It was just like so much, so much packed into like such a short space of time. It seemed to reveal the fleeting nature of time as well. It's just like, this feels like it's been forever.
He has done a lot more than most presidents have done already. Good or bad, it doesn't matter. He's done a whole lot more than most presidents.
Yeah. It's gonna be pretty fascinating. So, that's good. I think maybe we'll just wrap up here. I don't want to just keep going for the sake of it. I think that what you said is quite concise and actually really helpful. So, thanks. Yeah, thanks so much. That was great.
Glad to be here. Thanks for the chance to be with you again, Mark. Always a pleasure.
No worries. Cool.